Number 11. Lost in the Great Lakes. During World War II, some 200 to 300 aircraft were lost in the Great Lakes. A majority of those aircraft were lost in Lake Michigan. Why? Lake Michigan was the place where Navy pilots attempted to qualify for carrier takeoffs and landings. It was also a safer location for pilots to train than the Atlantic or Pacific. There were possible threats of enemy attacks, especially submarines, so it was important to protect pilots that were still training and not quite combat ready. The Navy even took some older ships and converted them to look like aircraft carriers. There were two boats, the USS Wolverine and the USS Sable. Both were kept in the Great Lakes for training needs. Both ships were decommissioned after World War II. There was a tremendous amount of training going on during the Second World War right in Lake Michigan, said Ben Page, a museum curator in Wisconsin, when interviewed by a local radio station in 2021. Roughly 15,000 pilots trained on Lake Michigan alone. Of the 200 to 300 planes that crashed into Lake Michigan, roughly 50 have been rescued, including a Grumman F-4F-3 Wildcat fighter that is currently on exhibit at the EAA Aviation Museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Some of the planes that crashed were salvaged during the war, while other planes were rescued decades later. The crashes have been attributed to miscalculations by pilots and aircraft mechanical failures. Also, not all of the training action was over Lake Michigan. Another training location was Lake Huron. Lake Huron is the burial spot for some lost Army aircraft. Although it's not a Great Lake, there are Army planes that were also lost in Lake St. Clair, which is south of Lake Huron near Detroit, Michigan and Windsor, Ontario. The Tuskegee Airmen did test flights over Lake Huron. The Tuskegee Airmen were the first African-American pilots to serve for the United States during World War II. They trained in Alabama at the segregated Tuskegee Army Airfield. Then they went to Michigan to complete more training missions over Lake Huron. These were advanced training missions, and the location in Michigan was perfect because it mirrored conditions the pilots would face in Europe. Following the completion of the training missions in Michigan, some of the pilots were sent to North Africa and Europe. The rest were transferred to an airbase in South Carolina. One of the locations used in Michigan by the Tuskegee Airmen would be used by French pilots afterwards. They were brought into the United States for training. 2 aircraft were lost between 1943 and 1944, but later found. They were crashes that occurred during training missions. Both pilots, Lieutenant Frank Moody and Lieutenant Nathaniel Rayberg, were killed during these crashes. Their planes were both Bell P-39Q Air Cobras. Moody's crash was believed to be due to the failure of his machine guns not being properly synced to his propellers. It is believed Moody tried firing his guns, but they damaged the propellers and he crashed. Moody and Rayberg were not the only crashes linked to the Tuskegee Airmen. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has the following data on Tuskegee aircraft lost in Lake Huron. A Curtiss P-40F Warhawk flown by 2nd Lieutenant Wilmoth W. Sidat Singh crashed in Lake Huron east of Tawas Bay on May 9, 1943. A Vultee BT-13A Valiant, piloted by 2nd Lieutenant Nathaniel Milton Hill, with weather observer 2nd Lieutenant Luther Linson Blakely on board, crashed on Lake Huron 2 miles off Oscoda on June 16, 1943. The Bell P-39Q Air Cobra, piloted by 2nd Lieutenant William E. Hill, crashed into Lake Huron off Harrisville on November 22, 1943. The bodies of all the pilots, with the exception of 2nd Lieutenant William E. Hill, have been recovered. Some of the French pilots that trained at the Great Lakes were also involved in crashes. 5 Republic P-47D Thunderbolts crashed into Lake Huron. Sergeant Francois Messenger was one of the crashed P-47D Thunderbolt pilots, and he was killed in the accident near Sturgeon Point at Lake Huron. Since the 1980s, there have been attempts to locate the missing Lake Michigan planes. Taras Lysenko is one of those people, and his company has assisted in the recovery of 40 aircraft from Lake Michigan. One of those planes, an SBD Dauntless dive bomber, is on exhibit at the Air Zoo near Kalamazoo, Michigan. The Navy has researched the aircraft lost in Lake Michigan. The aircraft assemblage in Lake Michigan represents the largest and best preserved group of U.S. Navy sunken historic aircraft in the world. From a historical perspective, the assemblage provides a wealth of knowledge about the history of naval aviation. The cool waters of Lake Michigan have allowed the planes to be preserved nicely. When recovered, some of the planes have even been in surprisingly good shape. Number 10. Lake Simon, Quebec. In 2021, an amateur diver was exploring the waters of Lake Simon in the Outaouais region of Quebec, Canada. While exploring for wood in the lake, the diver discovered a strange object at the bottom. The diver's discovery was reported as a mast that could resemble an airplane. The diver told the press, "From my observations, this is an aircraft from World War II. It's quite amazing." The diver added that they believed the wreckage was that of a L'attaqueur 631 type seaplane. Sadly, the diver claimed that they saw the remains of those who were on board when the plane crashed into the lake. While the diver believed the plane is from World War II, no further updates have been provided about the plane or when the wreck occurred. What is your favorite World War II era plane? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Number 9. Lake Greenwood, South Carolina. A World War II era B-25 training airplane discovered in Lake Greenwood in South Carolina has been on exhibit for the community. Discovered in 1983, the B-25 was restored by the South Carolina Historic Aviation Foundation. Visitors have a chance to view the plane in person. What we know about the crash of the B-25 was that it was flying too low near Lake Greenwood on June 6, 1944, which was D-Day. While the plane has been restored, it is by no means flyable. However, there are plans to use it as a centerpiece at a proposed South Carolina museum. Number 8. Gander Lake, Newfoundland. A B-24 Liberator bomber was discovered in Gander Lake, Newfoundland in 2022. The B-24, with a crew of 4, crashed in 1943. All 4 on board were killed. The plane had been in the lake for 79 years. A diver with the Royal Canadian Geographical Society said, "At about 120 feet of depth, I saw the landing gear with what appeared to be fully inflated tires, and it's kind of crumpled, but other than that, the wings that we saw underwater are remarkably in incredible condition, well preserved." The dive was not easy because of the color of Gander Lake, which has been described as tea red. That color absorbs light, which makes any dive a night dive. Rescue efforts were attempted following the wreck, but crews were apprehensive to get the wreckage when it was discovered in a deep part of Lake Gander. A rescue team, including people from groups like Shipwreck Preservation Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, attempted to locate and rescue the plane. Number 7. Lake Mead, Nevada, Arizona. In this story, a World War II bomber crashed after the war. It was July 1948 when a B-29 crashed into Lake Mead, a body of water that goes from Nevada into Arizona. 5 crew members were on board when the plane crashed. A report claimed the B-29 crashed due to the instruments on the plane being improperly calibrated. Gossip around town said the plane crashed because the pilot was hot-dogging or flying the plane too low as a stunt. Whatever the cause, the plane hit the water of Lake Mead and then flew another 200 to 300 feet when it went into the water. 4 of the 5 were able to escape, but 1 was stuck inside the plane. A couple crew members went into the water to save the 5th. They were all fine and got into a raft to await help. They were eventually rescued and returned to base. The B-29 rolled off the assembly line days after Japan surrendered. It was never in combat, but was equipped to be a plane that could research cosmic rays. The plane was at the bottom of Lake Mead until it was discovered by a local diver in 2001. It is still at the bottom of Lake Mead. A Nevada newspaper provided a status on the B-29. The B-29 is currently listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and the Park Service is pursuing designating it as a National Historic Landmark, a much higher status and an indication on the part of the American people that these particular places or objects are important. Number 6. Dutch Lakes. Back in 2020, a short Sterling bomber BK-716 was found in Lake Markmermeer near Amsterdam. The plane had been missing since 1943 following a bombing raid in Germany. The remains of one of the crew was found on board, and there was an attempt to get in contact with the victim's living relatives. It was reported in 2022 that a British plane discovered in Jesselmeer Lake was going to be retrieved. The plane went missing after a June 1943 bombing mission. Local fishermen discovered the wreck in 1996, and the Dutch Navy investigated the wreckage. It should be noted that during World War II, some 5,500 Allied and German aircraft went down over the Netherlands. Number 5. Lake Washington in Washington State. This is another wreck involving a World War II plane after the war had ended. In 1956, a PB-4Y Navy bomber was on a routine training flight from the Sandpoint Naval Air Station near Puget Sound. The plane crashed into Lake Washington and the crew were saved. There was an attempt to lift the wreckage from the water, but something broke during the operation and the plane sank into Lake Washington again. Years later, divers came across the wreckage in 155 feet of water. They were pleased to see that the plane was pretty much well preserved. It is currently a popular spot for divers. Number 4. Szczecin Lagoon, Poland. An American B-17 Flying Fortress was found in Szczecin Lagoon in Poland by a search team. A member told the press, "You can clearly see the wing, engine, and fuselage. Everything indicates that these may be the remains of an American B-17G bomber that was shot down on the 7th of October, 1944. The B-17 Flying Fortress was likely on a mission to take out a synthetic gasoline factory in the Polish town of Police, which is now Police. It was a major target for Allies since the factory provided synthetic gasoline to Nazi Germany. Number 3. Lower Otay Reservoir, California. The Lower Otay Reservoir is east of Chula Vista in California. On May 28, 1945, an SBC-2C-4 Helldiver crashed into the reservoir. It was lifted from the reservoir in 2010 to an enthusiastic crowd. The plane had spent 65 years underwater. While the plane did crash in 1945, the crew did survive. The pilots had passed away at the time the plane was lifted from the reservoir. Their family members were in attendance and they said it was an emotional experience. "I just wish my dad was here to see this," said one of the family members. The plane was discovered by a fisherman who was using a fish-finding device on his boat. Divers from San Diego and Chicago worked together to free the plane from the bed of silt and mud. The National Aviation Museum in Florida donated $125,000 to the rescue of the sunken aircraft. The museum also asked for the plane to be transported to their museum, where they would restore the plane, which might be an estimated $200,000. Number 2. Lake Muskoka in Ontario. It was December 13, 1940, when two planes collided over Lake Muskoka, which is 130 miles north of Toronto. One of the planes was a Northrop A-17 Nomad aircraft. It collided with a similar plane during a mission. The similar plane wreckage was found, but the Northrop A-17 Nomad was listed as lost for nearly 70 years. Also, the crew of 2 men were never recovered. Ontario Provincial Police divers found the wreckage of the plane in 2010. The remains of the crew were found 2 years later, and their remains were interned. The wreckage was pulled to the surface in 2014. The wreckage was sent to the National Air Force Museum of Canada in Trenton, Ontario. A member of the Royal Canadian Navy said, "This aircraft is part of our Canadian history. It's part of our heritage. It was so really important we brought it back to the surface for the Canadian population to see that we don't abandon our brothers and sisters no matter where they are." And at number 1, Lake Ontario in New York. It was February 18, 1944, when a B-24 Liberator bomber known as Getaway Gertie vanished over Lake Ontario in upstate New York during a snowstorm. It is believed that the plane crashed into Lake Ontario. The plane has never been found, but there is a dedicated group of people working hard to try and locate the remains of this aircraft. 8 men were on the plane when it vanished. They were on a routine training mission and had flown out of base in Syracuse, New York. Researchers believe the plane is in deep water. Lake Ontario's deepest point is 802 feet, while some spots are under 300 feet in depth. A book about the plane and the quest to find it was released in 2023. The Japanese I-19 submarine carved out its name in the annals of maritime warfare through a single, devastating barrage of torpedoes. A moment that would ripple through the pages of history. On that fateful day, September 15, 1942, the I-19 unleashed a torpedo spread that would go down in the books as the most effective onslaught ever fired by a submarine. But before we move on, if you're joining us for the first time today, make sure you hit that subscribe button to see more incredible videos. And don't keep your thoughts to yourself. Head down below and drop a comment. And be sure to tell us what content you'd like to see next. Now, back to the story. In the wake of the Great War, or World War I, the world's major naval powers, which included Great Britain, the United States, France, Italy, and Japan, sought to redirect the looming threat of an expensive arms race. Their shared goal had two main objectives: to stave off future wars and to curb the rapid growth of naval fleets. Within this framework, a historic agreement was created, one that would set strict limits on the number and sizes of warships, including submarines, that each nation could build. Submarine warfare, in particular, saw a massive shift with the signing of this agreement. The stipulated limit for submarines was set at a measly 2,000 tons. Most countries found this limit relatively easy to follow through with. But this restraint would ultimately shape the course of all submarine development as World War II loomed eerily on the horizon. In contrast to their Western neighbors, Japanese submarines came out as a distinct breed. The I-class boats, which were regarded as fleet submarines, embodied the perfect blend of long-range capabilities and deadly speed. The I-19, shining example of this class, displaced a staggering 2,584 long tons, dwarfing the British, Italian, and German submarines, which struggled to reach just 1,000 tons. Her impressive arsenal included a 5.5-inch naval gun, a testament to her versatility and the Japanese Navy's commitment to both innovation and creativity. What truly set the I-19 and her B-type I-class counterparts apart from the rest was a revolutionary feature: the ability to carry and deploy an airplane from the sub. Encased in an airtight compartment, the I-19 held the Yokosuka E-1-4Y floatplane, affectionately called the Glen. This ingenious addition basically transformed these submarines into underwater aircraft carriers, a concept unmatched by other nations at the time. The Glen could be employed for multiple missions, from scouting and reconnaissance to light bombing, further enhancing the I-19's value. But the pièce de résistance of the I-19's armament was the formidable Type 95 torpedo. A modified version of the ship-launched Type 93 Long Lance torpedo, the Type 95 stood at the pinnacle of torpedo technology during most of World War II. Its superiority was clear given its remarkable range, which was 3 times that of its American counterpart, the troubled Mark 14 torpedo. The Type 95 was not just the fastest torpedo globally, but it also had the largest warhead of any submarine torpedo on the seas. The potency of these Japanese submarines came at a steep price: the need for a much larger crew. The I-19 required 94 to 105 men, contrasting the American Gander-class submarines, which operated efficiently with just 60 crew members. This underscored the unique complexity and capabilities of I-class submarines, reflecting the Japanese Navy's commitment to pushing boundaries in naval warfare. During the crucible of the 1930s, amidst the ominous rumblings of global conflict, the Japanese I-19 submarine was created as a testament to the nation's commitment to advancing naval tech. She represented a fusion of technological innovation and strategic capability. Her sleek profile and advanced propulsion systems set her apart from other subs, granting her the ability to navigate ocean depths with exceptional stealth and agility. The I-19's hull design, propulsion mechanisms, and armaments were thoughtfully crafted to achieve a formidable synergy. Her hull, a product of advanced engineering, ensured both hydrodynamic efficiency and resistance to the ever-crushing pressures involved with the deep sea. Propelled by advanced systems, she had a remarkable top speed of 23 knots and a range of 14,000 nautical miles at a fuel-efficient 16 knots on the surface, attributes that set her apart in submarine warfare. The I-19 took shape thanks to the hands of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries at the Kobe shipyard. The keel was officially laid on March 15, 1938, under the designation Submarine No. 39. Her construction was characterized by precision, as skilled shipbuilders transformed raw materials into the maritime marvel. On September 16, 1939, the submarine came out of the shipyard, finally christened as the I-19. Her launch marked a momentous occasion, ushering the birth of a vessel destined for a crucial role in World War II. April 28, 1941, marked the day of her commissioning into the Imperial Japanese Navy. Commanded by Commander Nahara Saigo, she was attached to the Yokozuna Naval District and assigned to the 6th Fleet Submarine Squadron 1, Submarine Division 2, alongside her sister ships the I-18 and I-20. One of her first assignments with fellow submarines I-21 and I-23 was to serve as the vanguard of Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's carrier force, which was rapidly closing in on Pearl Harbor. On that fateful day, December 7, 1941, the I-19 diligently patrolled 120 miles northeast of Oahu, maintaining a careful watch for any signs of American ships that might discover the approaching carrier task force. After her initial mission, the I-19 found herself tasked with an operation that took her to the west coast of North America alongside submarines I-15, I-9, I-10, I-17, I-21, I-23, I-25, and I-26. Their mission was as bold as it was risky. Attack shipping lanes along the western shores of the United States and Canada until Christmas Day. Upon reaching this date, a synchronized shelling of the coast was planned to panic the western United States and Canada before they all returned home. As the I-19 arrived off the coast of California north of Santa Barbara, her lookout spotted the 4,200-ton Norwegian freighter Panama Express. A torpedo was launched in pursuit, but it barely missed its target. The next day, the submarine's lookouts identified the 10,763-ton Standard Oil Company tanker SS HM Story, sparking a tense chase that lasted about an hour. 3 torpedoes were launched, but all missed the target, leading to the arrival of naval patrol planes in response to Story's distress calls. The I-19 was forced to dive to evade an oncoming depth charge attack. Christmas Eve brought further difficulties, this time near San Pedro, when the I-19 fired a torpedo at the 2,146-ton lumber schooner Barbara Olson. But the torpedo veered off its course and missed its mark. Later that day, the submarine set its sights on the 5,695-ton lumber carrier Absaroka. One of 2 torpedoes found its target, causing massive damage but failing to sink the vessel thanks to its buoyant cargo of lumber. The I-19 once again had to endure a depth charge attack before escaping. The synchronized Christmas Day shelling of the coast was postponed until the 27th. But by that time, the Japanese submarines along the west coast had already depleted their fuel reserves significantly. As a result, the shelling was cancelled, and all submarines were recalled without accomplishing their intended goal. For the crews of the subs assigned to this mission, it proved a disappointing venture. Despite their long journey, the expenditure of precious torpedoes, and the physical toll on both men and machines, their efforts had minimal results. The American defenses, thoroughly alarmed and vigilant, thwarted their plans, leaving them to grapple with the challenges of life on submarines characterized by little resources, confined spaces, and constant presence of engine heat and mold. Subsequently, the I-19 played a unique role in Operation K, the second attack on Pearl Harbor. On February 23, 1942, her Yokosuka E-14Y Glenn floatplane undertook a bold night reconnaissance mission over Pearl Harbor, gathering crucial intelligence in preparation for the assault. On March 4th, the submarine arrived at the French frigate Shoals, where she took on the vital role of a radio beacon as well as a means of refueling the Kawanishi H-8K Emily flying boats that were involved in the attack. Ultimately, though, harsh weather conditions obscured the target and the attack was not effective. In the saga of the I-19's wartime operations, she was brought into the heart of a complex and strategic plan, Operation Al, that aimed to strike Midway Island in May of that year. Tasked with a pivotal role, the I-19 was assigned to the Aleutian Islands, a theater of operations that would have her supporting the invasion of the Attu and Kiska Islands. On May 26, 1942, the I-19 was on a scouting mission near Umnak Island, her crew diligently preparing their Yokosuka E-14 Glenn floatplane for a short reconnaissance flight. The skies seemed to hold valuable information, but the tides of war were unpredictable. Just as the plane was being assembled, the lookout crew saw an American destroyer on the horizon. In a tense moment, Captain Narahara made a quick decision. He ordered the deck crew to abandon their efforts and initiated an emergency crash dive. The abrupt maneuver ended in the unfortunate destruction of the half-built floatplane, a testament to the urgency of the situation. Unfazed by this setback, the I-19's crew continued with their scouting mission. Submerged under the waves, they relied on periscope observations to study the surroundings. This 2-day submerged stint allowed them to gather important intelligence and keep a watchful eye on the strategic outpost of Dutch Harbor. The events of August 7, 1942 marked a critical juncture for the I-19. After undergoing repairs and getting a new captain, Commander Kinashi Takakuzo, the sub was called to confront an imposing American challenge. The backdrop of this flight was the Guadalcanal campaign in the Solomon Islands, a pivotal theater in the Pacific War. By the time August 24th came around, the I-19 had arrived at the station, positioned 200 miles southeast of Guadalcanal. Tasked with patrol duties, the submarine began a relentless search for targets in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Her presence bore witness to the intricate dance of strategy and tactics that characterized this phase of the war. Meanwhile, on the surface, 2 formidable American task forces arrived. These forces were centered around the aircraft carriers Wasp and Hornet. Their combined strength was intended to safeguard reinforcement convoy transporting the 7th Marine Regiment from Espiritu Santo to Guadalcanal. The carriers sailed carefully, staying within sight of each other, a display of American naval power that was seen by the watchful eye of the lurking I-19. As the I-19 continued her patrol, the keen ears of her sound operator picked up the telltale sounds of a squadron of American ships. With expert precision, Captain Kinashi turned to his periscope. The American squadron, despite its zigzagging course, placed the carriers into the wind, a maneuver required for the launch and retrieval of planes. Seizing the moment, Captain Kinashi meticulously calculated the course and speed of the approaching Wasp. It was 11:45 a.m., a moment forever set in history, when the I-19 unleashed her deadly payload, a brutal spread of 6 torpedoes targeted at the mighty carrier. On board the Wasp, during the bustling activity of plane retrieval, the ship's cameraman, Leslie Elliott Jr., watched on the bridge. Suddenly, the unthinkable happened. Signs of torpedoes in the water. In a frantic attempt to escape the impending doom, the helmsman wrestled with the wheel, trying to steer the ship clear of the deadly projectiles. But fate had other ideas. 3 of the torpedoes hit their mark, triggering a long chain of explosions that set the Wasp's fate in stone. The carrier was rocked by multiple blasts, rupturing vital machine systems, including the ship's water main and pumps. Fires raged on uncontrollably, their insatiable hunger threatening to take over the once proud vessel. Amidst the chaos, Leslie Elliott Jr. was hit in the forehead by shrapnel. Despite his injuries, his instinct was to capture the unfolding tragedy through his camera lens. But Captain Forrest P. Sherman had different orders. Elliott was told to go to the sickbay as flames and devastation ravaged on the doomed ship. As thick, black smoke choked the air and secondary explosions echoed, the order to abandon ship rang through the beleaguered Wasp. The aftermath of the torpedo strikes was nothing short of catastrophic. The Wasp carrier, once a symbol of American naval prestige, was now mortally wounded, her decks abandoned by those who once served her with unwavering dedication. The toll was heavy. 193 sailors were killed and 367 were wounded. Yet, the I-19's torpedoes had not finished its deadly course. One of them found its mark on the battleship North Carolina, striking her on the port bow just in front of the formidable armor belt designed to protect her from similar assaults. The detonation was severe, rocking the battleship and sending torrents of fuel and water into the skies. Seawater surged into the gaping 32 by 18-foot hole, causing the mighty battleship to tilt dangerously to port. Yet another torpedo hit the destroyer O'Brien, leading to its eventual sinking. But with the hunter becoming the hunted, it was now the I-19's turn. Other destroyers descended upon the submarine, which came under relentless depth charge attacks, an onslaught as fierce as the seas themselves. Up to 80 depth charges exploded around the I-19, shaking her to the core. Yet incredibly, the indomitable submarine survived the onslaught to fight another day. The I-19's attack on that day, sinking the USS Wasp, damaging the North Carolina, and delivering the lethal blow to the O'Brien, echoes through history as one of the most devastating torpedo attacks ever unleashed from beneath the waves. But with the tide of war turning increasingly against Japan, the US Navy would soon gain its revenge. On November 25, 1943, under the dark waters west of Makin Island, the I-19 met its doom. The American destroyer USS Radford, armed with radar and sonar equipment, spotted the lurking presence of the submarine. As the I-19 dove, the Radford swiftly closed in, launching a relentless assault with 7 depth charges, sinking the I-19 with the loss of all 105 crew members.
3. Operation Acid Gambit. During the 1980s, the United States was involved in multiple situations around the globe. There was trouble in the Middle East and Libya, and there were also issues on the tiny island of Grenada. Another country they were involved in at the time was Panama. The United States has had a lengthy history of involvement in Central and South America. In 1902, the US voted to build a canal in the Western Hemisphere to make international travel easier. Original plans had the canal going through Nicaragua, but this eventually changed. Their new location was Panama. It's a narrow country in Latin America, and construction was much easier there than going across a larger nation like Nicaragua. The Panama Canal was finished in 1914. Along with its completion, the US entered into a joint commission with Panama to oversee and manage the waterway. During the presidency of Jimmy Carter in 1977, an agreement was made to hand the canal over to a Panamanian commission. The year this would take place was set for 1999. In 1989, President George H.W. Bush decided to send the US military to Panama to restore order and to capture their president, Manuel Noriega. Noriega was a strict military man who was viewed as an ally to the United States. He was also known to use violence and intimidation to get his way. Noriega was reported to have been involved in the illegal trafficking of narcotics and racketeering. This was complicated since the US was very public about its war on drugs. They couldn't afford to be seen as allies with someone doing exactly what they were fighting. Noriega's relationship with the US went sour in 1989 when an American serviceman in Panama was murdered. Noriega also imprisoned an American CIA operative named Kurt Muse and even threatened to execute him. The operative was living in Panama at the time and was in jail because it was believed he was part of an undercover plot to overthrow the Panamanian government. Muse was extremely critical of the Noriega government because they kidnapped and killed a close friend of his. This was likely due to both Muse and the friend being anti-Noriega. Muse ran a print shop that printed posters for a rally. The event was held to remember the friend who was kidnapped and killed. In response, Noriega's men burned down the operative shop. Muse then started broadcasting anti-Noriega propaganda because Noriega was up for re-election. The democratic process turned out to be a sham though, and Noriega remained in his seat of power. By this point, President Bush had had enough of Noriega and his violent antics. He sent over 20,000 troops to Panama in December 1989. Part of that group of soldiers was Delta Force. The primary objective of Delta Force members is to deal with counter-terrorism operations. They're trained to deal with the apprehension or elimination of high-profile targets and breaking up terrorist cells if necessary. Delta Force was given the difficult task of rescuing Kurt Muse in a mission called Operation Acid Gambit. They brought in helicopters to rescue Muse from prison on December 20th. The helicopters dropped Delta Force on the roof, they blew through a door, went down 2 flights of stairs, killed the guard who was watching Muse, and swiftly rescued him. Before long, Muse was tearfully reunited with his family. As far as the invasion of Panama went, it went off without any major hitch. Panamanian forces were overwhelmed by the US and didn't pose a threat. Noriega went to the Vatican's embassy in Panama City for refuge. This made the operation last much longer than it needed to be. But the US military set up loudspeakers and blasted rock music non-stop at the Vatican's embassy to break Noriega's spirit. He finally surrendered to them in January 1990. Noriega was incarcerated in the United States up until 2007, but he was prosecuted in Panama and France after the fact for other crimes. He was then sent to a prison in France and back to Panama in 2011. He was released from prison in 2017 but was in poor health. He died that same year not long after tasting freedom. On a final note, on December 31st, 1999, the United States did decide to turn over control of the Panama Canal. What's your favorite spy movie? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. 2. Bay of Pigs. The United States and Cuba have a long and complicated relationship. Located about 90 miles off the coast of Florida, Cuba is a communist nation that's been the thorn in the side of the US since the late 1950s. Cuba was a country commonly known for its sugarcane crop. It was also a wealthy colony for Spain during the 18th century. In the 19th century, it was still going strong and was once one of the most mechanized agricultural nations in the world. At one point, they produced about 1/3 of the world's sugar. Spain still controlled Cuba, but lost it after the Spanish-American War of 1898 with the US. Cuba won its independence, but it was a nation under United States careful control. After a while, the US allowed Cuba to be its own country, but still played a key role in their governing style. Cuba wasn't able to escape the shadow of the United States, but that'll change during the 1950s. It started with a revolution against President Fulgencio Batista. Fidel Castro and his forces were victorious, and they quickly established a communist government. This was a major point of frustration for the United States. After World War II, the US was on a mission to stop communism from spreading around the world. After the revolution in Cuba, communism wasn't far from the US. To make the situation even worse, Cuba was also an ally to the Soviet Union, the communist adversary to the States. The US cut off diplomatic ties with Cuba at this point, and they also put an embargo on goods to the country, but allowed food and medicine as an exception. On the other side of the conflict, Castro blamed the US for insurgents in Cuba. As soon as the communists took power, the United States was plotting to overthrow the Cuban government. President Eisenhower was briefed on the plan. They feared that Cuba would help communism spread into Latin and South America. The Central Intelligence Agency CIA assisted in the planning of an invasion of Cuba to overthrow Castro. Their goal was to set an invasion, but not make it look like something that was initiated by the United States. What they feared was the operation being seen as the US declaring war on Cuba, which would possibly bring the Soviet Union into the picture. This invasion was planned to be conducted by about 1,500 Cuban exiles who were trained by the United States. Planes and boats would also be used in the invasion, but they would be painted to look like planes and ships from another country, not the US. The planes were meant to bomb Cuban military air bases, and the boats were sent to land the troops. Places to land were discussed, and the final choice was marked for the Bay of Pigs. The actual invasion happened during the presidency of John F. Kennedy. Everything was planned, and the stage was set and ready for the operation. It was April 15, 1961, when 3 US-made airplanes flown by Cubans started bombing Cuban air bases. 2 days later, a large number of Cuban operatives trained by the US and armed with weapons from the government landed at several positions on the island. The main landing took place at the Bay of Pigs on the southern coast. Although the planes bombed the Cuban air bases, they didn't do a great deal of damage. The Cubans somehow learned of the attack and were able to move their aircraft out of harm's way. President Kennedy was not thrilled with the results of the bombing. He was frustrated. He initially thought that the plan set by the CIA would be executed to not appear like a US-backed invasion of the island. After a while, Kennedy believed the plans were too grandiose and poorly executed. The invasion was instantly spotted by Cubans, and they broadcast the news over the radio. This frustrated the CIA. Paratroopers were also deployed in the invasion and were dropped off at the wrong location. The 1,500 men were quickly outnumbered by Castro's military, and the Bay of Pigs invasion lasted just 2 days. Out of the 1,500, about 114 people were killed, and the rest were taken prisoner. Castro had several demands for the release of the prisoners. The United States was forced to negotiate with Castro. In the end, they sent him over $50 million worth of food and medicine, and the prisoners were released between 1962 and 1965. 1. Operation Wrath of God. The 1972 Olympics were held in Munich, West Germany. This was the first time the major event was held in Germany since the infamous Berlin 1936 Olympics. Adolf Hitler basically used the 1936 Olympics as a platform to spread his hate and Nazi agenda. The organizers of the 1972 Olympics wanted to erase that unsavory legacy and show Germany's progress. The motto for this year was the Cheerful Games. Another reason these Olympic Games needed to go over without a problem is that the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City were hit by an ugly incident right before the event. Students protested that the government was putting too many funds towards the Olympics and not investing in much-needed social programs. The protest took an ugly turn when the protesters were fired upon by the military. Over 200 people were killed. A week after the 1972 Olympics in Munich opened, there was unfortunately another horrible incident. During the morning of September 5, 1972, a group of Palestinians belonging to the Black September militant group somehow managed to enter the Olympic Village armed with machine guns and grenades. They took 9 members of the Israeli Olympic team hostage. 2 of the members were killed in the process. The Palestinian terrorists had several demands. They demanded the release of 236 Palestinians being held in Israeli prisons. Also, they requested a plane to take the terrorists to a destination of their choice in the Middle East. If these demands were not met, they threatened dire consequences for the hostages. Because of this, West Germany was put in a tight spot. They couldn't negotiate the release of the 236 Palestinians who weren't in their country, and Israel told them no to the deal. Israel basically left West Germany to deal with the terrorists themselves. After World War II, Germany was divided into 2 different countries. There was the democratic Western-backed West Germany and the communist-backed East Germany. West Germany was imposed with certain rules for their police and military members following their surrender in World War II. The military were forbidden to help the police in West Germany in situations like this. With this in mind, the police were not properly trained and weren't ready for dealing with terrorist threats. The West German police eventually developed a plan. They told the terrorist group that they could fly them to Cairo, Egypt. Cairo was sympathetic to the Palestinians since Egypt was an enemy of Israel. The West Germans planned to disguise their police officers as the crew and overtake the terrorists when they got on board the plane. The deal worked. Now it just had to actually be executed. During the night of September 5, 1972, the terrorists and their hostages got on a bus that took them to waiting helicopters. The aircraft then transported everyone to Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base outside of Munich, where the plane to Cairo was ready and waiting. Some of the West German police backed out of the plan to disguise themselves since the plane crew claimed it was far too dangerous. They quickly adapted a plan to use snipers instead, but there were issues with this plan as well. The police didn't have the right kind of rifles, and they didn't know who was a terrorist and who was a member of the Olympic team. Armored cars were reportedly ordered to be used for the rescue, but they were stuck in traffic. What happened next was heartbreaking. Two of the terrorists inspected the plane. Something caught their attention, and they yelled to the other that it was some sort of trap. Gunfire then erupted, and the scene turned into pure chaos. The helicopter crews ran for cover, but the Israelis were tied up in a helicopter. All of this was being broadcast, and a few news outlets reported that the terrorists were taken out and the hostages had been freed. This information was not the truth though. During the shooting, the terrorists actually murdered the Israeli hostages. All but 3 of the terrorists were killed. The other 3 were captured not long after. When the news of what happened was broadcasted, an announcer for the ABC News in the United States simply reported in a devastated voice, "They're all gone." This was also the first terrorist attack carried out on television. The media was at the games, and every move was reported on. The 3 captured terrorists were allowed a press conference to discuss their roles in the attack and Palestinian grievances. After the massacre at Munich, Israel created a secret committee to deal with the incident. The Prime Minister of Israel and the Defense Minister created a group made of members of Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence agency, as well as the Israeli Defense Forces. They would be part of a secret mission called Operation Wrath of God. The mission started in late 1972. The first targets were Wael Zweiter and Mahmoud Hamshari. Zweiter was in Rome and was taken out in his apartment. Hamshari was approached by a member of the special missions team who posed as an Italian journalist. The member told Hamshari that they wanted to do a phone interview, and Hamshari agreed. The Wrath of God team then planted an explosive device in his phone. They called Hamshari at the agreed-upon interview time, and when he picked up his phone, the bomb went off. Next on the hit list were Basil al-Qubaisi, Hussein Abad al-Shir, Zaid Muchassi, and Mohammed Boudia. But in 1973, the Wrath of God operatives made a critical mistake in Lillehammer, Norway. The wrong person was targeted and killed. 5 Mossad operatives were arrested and convicted in the incident. Their last target was taken out in 1979 in Beirut, Lebanon. Do you know of any other secret missions you'd like us to make a video about? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.